And for more, Dr. Myong-hyun, a research fellow from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies, joins us in the studio today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So like we just heard, the U.S. believes that complete denuclearization of North Korea is possible before the end of President Donald Trump's first term in office. So we have just about under 2 years left now. So the U.S. says it's discussed a timeline, and Washington is hopeful that it's achieved. Now, at the same time, the U.S. official also touches upon sanctions and says it could be strengthened if President Donald Trump decides to strengthen them. What's your take?
Well, clearly, after the breakdown of talks in Hanoi last week, North Korea and the United States, they are not in the most favorable situation when it comes to continuing the dialogue. Clearly, the Hanoi summit revealed there are fundamental differences between the two sides, and then we need more dialogue between the two sides to shrink the gap in their respective positions. So far, there are talks of sanctions being increased, or North Korea going back to carrying out provocations. But in truth, neither side has really taken decisive action in either direction. So these are for now all talks. So we are talking about hypotheticals here. So hopefully the two sides are going to continue talking before resorting to some other options.
So at the same time, the U.S. does seem to have the door open for dialogue, and National Security Advisor John Bolton said that President Trump is open to talking to North Korea again. We've heard U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo saying that he wants to send a negotiating team to Pyongyang in the coming weeks. If North Korea does respond, when do you think it will return to the negotiating table, or do you think it still needs some time to review the Hanoi summit?
I think, the U.S. side should fundamentally review what they had experienced back in Hanoi. Especially regarding the North Korean position. We have to understand that the two sides clearly have very serious differences. North Korea doesn't want to give up more than Myong-hyun when it comes to complete denuclearization of its own country. The United States is not willing to budge in terms of lifting any of the sanctions measures before North Korea commits to a serious denuclearization roadmap. So we have a very fundamental difference between the two. So I think North Korea, if they're exploring options right now, probably they're exploring options of how to change this framework of dialogue from one about North Korea denuclearizing or to something about that, it's all about lifting sanctions right away. So I think we have to go through a little bit more of I would say a little bit of a standoff between the two until this situation is resolved. So I think what the American side is talking about right now, continuing the talks, probably it's not realistic, because I don't think the North Koreans are happy with continuing the dialogue the way it is.
But a sticking point at the moment is the fact that U.S. monitors say that North Korea's missile engine test site appears to have been rebuilt following the breakdown of the Hanoi summit last week. Now, President Trump keeps continuing to say that he would be very disappointed if the reports are confirmed to be true. Now, if North Korea is indeed bringing back the test site into operation, what do you think its intentions are?
Clearly, it's a way to signal their displeasure at how the dialogue was going before the Hanoi summit, of course, including what happened in Hanoi. But then, when it comes to reading signals or reading signs of North Korea deviating from the path of dialogue towards something more sinister, such as restarting the provocation cycle, I think the jury is still out on that. So we have to, I think there's some optimism that North Korea might stay on the path of dialogue, but then we have to be a little bit worried about not reaching out to North Korea at this moment.
So would you say it gives North Korea a little bit more leverage?
Definitely. I think North Korea is trying to signal to the rest of the world that the breakdown of dialogue is not really their fault.
How much of a meaningful impact do you think it will have on the denuclearization talks going forward between Washington and Pyongyang?
I think this is the fundamental inflection point from my point of view. The things cannot be the same as before. I think the United States, if they wants to continue the dialogue in the positive direction, which could lead to a constructive outcome, I think the United States should rethink about their approach now.
So Seoul and Washington kicked off their annual joint military drills earlier this week. Now it's the scaled-down version, 동맹, known as Alliance in English. Now the North State media denounced the exercise, saying that it's a violation of joint summit agreements between with Washington and Seoul. However, they are much smaller in scale, and the two allies said that they want to reduce tensions through this and keep the momentum going for dialogue. What's your take on this?
So clearly the United States and South Korea scaled down the joint military exercise by eliminating the offensive component on their exercise. The leftover exercise component called Dongmeng is essentially about the defense of the South Korea in case of contingency. So what this North Korean reaction actually, I would say it's a positioning on the part of North Korea. Just as rebuilding the Dongchangli missile test site for further testing, this criticism in a way positions North Korea to essentially defend themselves or like justify their provocation if they are going to carry out a provocation, such as by launching a missile. So if they launch a missile, they can say this is a response to the continuation of the U.S. and South Korean joint military exercise against the agreement that the two sides had reached before.
So in the meantime, South Korea and the U.S. are stepping up efforts to keep the momentum going on with dialogue. We saw South Korea's top nuclear envoy Lee Do-hun meet with his U.S. counterpart Stephen Biegun, and there's also a meeting in the works between U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Seoul's Foreign Minister Kang Kyung-hwa. Now, Seoul also wants to use inter-Korean projects as a means to get these talks going back on track, but U.S. obviously isn't too positive about it. Do you think the two sides are very far apart on this issue?
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental difference in reading the signals coming from North Korea. As I mentioned previously, I think the South Korean government is right to think that the breakdown of Hanoi talks is actually a reflection of a deeper difference between Pyongyang and Washington. So I think there's some concern in Seoul that North Korea might disengage from dialogue unless we put on the table sufficient incentives, which the United States refused to do. I think South Korea essentially is taking the role of providing incentives, providing the carrot, so to speak. And I think that's a different approach from the American approach. And that's the reason why I think the two sides, meaning South Korea and the United States this time, to resolve their differences in policy positions. I think it's going to be very important.
So Seoul's presidential office says it will review the possibility of reopening the joint Kaesong industrial complex in North Korea under the UN sanctions framework, and it will seek consultations with Washington. Now, it has named a new cabinet minister and obviously for a new unification minister as well, Kim Hyun-chul. Do you think it's an indication of the president's growing focus on inter-Korean relations? Do you believe he's the right man for the job?
Well, the new unification minister, Kim Hyun-chul, is definitely a very good North Korea specialist, and he understands North Korea well. He has a long experience dealing with North Korea, going back to the Myong-hyun president's days almost 15 years ago. So in that sense, he's really well suited for the job. But then we have to also understand that I think President Moon appointed him having in mind restarting actually expanding the scope of inter-Korean exchange projects. So there's a little bit of mismatch between his intention and the timing. Timing indicates that we might actually face tougher times in engaging North Korea economically because of the remaining sanctions. So I think it's going to be Dr. Kim's challenge to how to resolve the situation.
Yes, the U.S. does seem to be firm on its stance towards sanctions. Shifting gears to North Korea's documentary film on the Kim-Trump summit. Now, the film showed scenes that we hadn't seen before in the conventional media. Included footages of the moments that the two leaders wrapped up their summit. We saw Trump patting Kim on the shoulder, and also Trump offering a handshake to North Korean officials, including Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho and nuclear negotiator Kim Yong-chul. What did you make of the overall atmosphere of the film?
Oh, it was very cordial. It looked like the two sides got along. It would be difficult to believe that right after the movie, recording the scene, the whole talks broke down. So this is essentially a spin job by the North Korean regime for internal purposes. They want to show that the United States and North Korea, incredibly enough, they are talking to each other despite their differences. I think that's the message they are trying to inculcate in the North Korean public.
So like North Korean media, the film made no mention of the talks breaking down either, no criticisms of the U.S., and spun the meeting in a positive light. Now, the film said the two countries can write a new history if they engage in negotiations with fair proposal, appropriate attitude, and will to solve the problem. What did you make of this?
Well, definitely that's a truism. I think we all agree that if either side changes attitude, we can have a new chapter in our history. Whether that's going to be possible or not, we have to see the content of the agreement. So, this is a typical, as I mentioned before, it's a spin job. Essentially, I think the North Korean regime tries to make something out of what happened in Hanoi. It was actually lemon, but trying to make a lemonade out of it, I would say.
So the documentary also shows footages of U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton. Now, in the past, North Korea has harshly criticized the advisor, using harsh words to describe him, but now they've pointed to some have pointed to John Bolton for the breakdown in the talks. But looking at the footage, it's actually hard to tell. What's your take on this?
Well, clearly we have to wait and see whether North Korea keeps addressing John Bolton as John Bolton instead of calling names. So I think this is just one data point in the long line of data points that we need to discern a pattern out of it.
Now, according to a CNN report, North Korea was desperate for a deal in Hanoi, and after Trump decided to walk away, there are reports saying that North Korean officials chased him back. Now, citing unnamed U.S. officials, the CNN said that North Korean Vice Foreign Minister, Choi Sun-hee, had run after the U.S. delegation with an offer from Kim Jong-un to dismantle the entire Yongbyon nuclear facility in exchange for sanctions relief, but the U.S. didn't take. Does this mean that in the future, North Korea will have to offer more than the Yongbyon nuclear complex?
So we have to understand what the variable was in this case. I mean, the most important variable here was the lifting of the sanctions. And then North Korea was asking for a total, complete lifting of the sanctions. And I think the United States negotiation team was operating under the framework. What would the United States ask from North Korea in exchange for a total, complete lifting of the sanctions? So what North Korea put on the table was just Yongbyon. And the United States was saying that that's not enough, they needed more. In this case, a number of undisclosed nuclear facilities. So this is where they're fighting over. Essentially, the price was actually zero. It's a complete lifting of the sanctions. The North Korea and the United States were arguing over this. So had North Korea, had Choi Sun-hee gone after the U.S. team with a better offer, so instead of, they could have put the Yongbyon on the table, but instead of asking for a complete lifting of the sanctions, Choi Sun-hee could have asked for something less, partial lifting of the sanctions. I think the United States could have been game with that kind of offer. But the thing is that they have to operate on this assumption that North Korea would only agree to some sort of agreement if the United States lifted all the sanctions. Then what will be the demand on the part of the United States in exchange for that? I think that was a fundamental disagreement that two sides had.
So you think when North Korea does in fact return to the negotiating table with Washington, it will make some adjustments to the concessions or demands that it makes to Washington?
I'm afraid that they are not going to do that. I think a Yongbyon is going to be their limit. There could be a minor variation on Yongbyon. Clearly, North Koreans play with the idea of defining what Yongbyon is. The Yongbyon is a huge, sprawling complex. So there are some indications that North Korea wanted to play with the definition, meaning for them, the Yongbyon was pertaining to a small number of facilities within it, whereas it's a much bigger complex. So they could play with the definition, but I think a Yongbyon is going to be the one that they're going to stick to for a while.
If they don't make any modification to the cards that they're playing, doesn't it mean that we can see a similar breakdown in the future negotiations as well, though?
So that's the fear that we have. I mean, especially with the movements we are observing in Dongchangli and then as other missile development sites. Clearly, there are some more concerns that back in 2017, when North Korea stopped their provocation cycle, that North Korea, and then they declared that they had to wrap up their nuclear development. There's a lot of skepticism about the claim because people knew that the North Korea needed to develop their missile side. So clearly they are taking out what they left off before. So there's also concern that this could be a major inflection point for the negative.
Yeah, so we'll have to keep close tabs on the developments as well, including its missile launch site as well. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for your insights.
Pleasure.